This is the Prestigious Initiative, and these are the points. I'm Chris Kent, and I'm joining Chris Bean. Hello, Mr. Bean.
Hello, sir.
Let's talk about our conversation with Ashton Rodenizer. Sketchnoting, great conversation. I really enjoyed. I love conversations that we can have with these people where we walk away from it and feel like we have grown and learned something. And Ashton introduced us to an idea of sketchnoting and the importance of creativity in this kind of realm and kind of area. Before we get into some of the notes that I made, do you have any, firsthand or first thoughts about how that conversation went?
Yeah, again, I was happy to learn. I came into it with a very, very base knowledge of what an idea of what sketchnoting is. So it was super helpful to hear from somebody who teaches this information that could kind of set us on the right path. Absolutely, yeah, I learned a lot.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So we talked about how pictures help us to communicate and to explain, and on top of that, also to be able to remember. And if you really take time to analyze it, we tend to think in pictures, or a lot of people do, not everybody. Think in pictures when we're reading something. We tend to visualize pictures. We're kind of really focused on these images, and so being able to use that to help remember or communicate or relay, just kind of quantify information is a great idea that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of or are aware of. It's revolutionary. If we can get this into the hands of more people and kind of put this as part of our a patented, not patented, but a more common way of thinking about note taking and processing information, communicating information, I think that we'd all be much better off. And I think that it's a valuable tool that not everyone is aware of, but can really benefit everybody in many different ways.
Well, I think the cool thing is note taking right now is given as a one size fits all everything, and she talked about this as we were talking too in the show, that early on in school development, we were drawing pictures all the time and then writing what happened in those pictures, those drawings, the doodles or whatever that we did. But after a certain age, boop, squash, don't do those anymore. Now it's got to be this. And then on top of that, this is the only way you can do it. And it's a one size fits all sort of method, but it doesn't actually work for everybody. As you write things out line by line by line, it hinders the opportunity to connect those things with previous ideas that you already had. And I think that, through talking with her, that seems to be the key takeaway for why sketchnoting is so helpful and impactful, is that then you have this new information coming in to the information that you already have, and you're able to link those things via note, not a note, a line, a box, a squiggly, whatever it is, that you can connect that new information with previous information, and that aids in actually understanding and learning the new information. And if, at the very least, school individuals or even people out in the workforce could see that as an option when they're taking notes, I think would be so helpful, because then it's not just, okay, write this line, write this line, write this line. They're not really thinking about what they're hearing. They're just writing it down as fast as they possibly can, as opposed to actively listening to what the other person has to say, linking that with other things in their brain, and then putting that on the pen and paper. Yeah, what a wonderful way to connect those ideas and establish new information and build on old information that you already had.
Ashton talked about how drawing requires you to think while you're listening. And you kind of mentioned just now too, if you're just reciting or writing down what you're hearing verbatim or the notes that you're taking, it doesn't require you to really think about it, because you're just copying what's coming in and what you're seeing. When you're drawing, you have to think about what you're hearing and actually turn that into something that has meaning, which leads us to the next point where we talked about drawing requires you to make that meaning real time. So you have to actively listen and think about what you're listening to so that you can turn that into something that has meaning. And we mentioned doodling when you're young, and I brought up the point that, it's scientifically proven through studies or However, I don't have the science behind it, however, but doodling does help some people to retain information and to focus and to actually pay attention, and using that as your stepping stone. So start with doodling and then kind of move into more of the sketchnoting where you're drawing lines, you're making boxes, you're creating icons that have meaning to them, and using that as that visual aid, thinking about what you're hearing, actually engaging with it, and then giving meaning to it. And I think the important part of that, which Ashton also pointed out, is that these drawings need to have emotion as a key part of it, and the emotions are connected into the drawing, so that it helps to provide that meaning. And it's a beautiful way to convey an idea. It's a beautiful way to get your point across by attaching the emotions or involving your emotions in these sketches and these drawings and these notes, and it all kind of ties together in this process of the sketchnoting.
Well, and so emotion is an interesting topic to bring up as you're doing this, because emotion can be conveyed much better, I think, through an image as it can writing lines on a page, because with those the emotion is often lost, and sometimes that emotion is where that connection can further its establishment onto the things that you already have, especially if you are looking, reviewing or re-looking at that information. The emotion that is lost on line and line and line, and then reading line and line, that is that, again, that emotion is able to be conveyed, I think, much better through an image on a page as opposed to a line on the page. So yeah, absolutely, what a helpful way.
We also differentiated between personal and professional sketch note taking. And so what I mean is, we got into it later, but I'll tie it in now too. You need to know the audience that you're trying to appeal or trying to communicate with. And so maybe if you're taking notes for yourself, your notes might look different as if you were taking it to share with somebody else, or share with a large group, or share to a company, or whatever it is. The notes that you're taking, the images you're creating, the visuals you're using are going to be different depending on who you're trying to communicate to. And that kind of gets into the next point where it's very easy for us to get caught up in the idea that we are not a good artist. We can't draw very well. We're not very good at making these pictures. But sketchnoting is not about necessarily being artistic. In fact, the essence of it is being able to communicate what you're trying to sketch. And so don't get so caught up in thinking that you can't draw very well, when the idea is to create something that helps you to remember the information you're sketchnoting, or to communicate the information that you're sketchnoting. And start small. We broke down starting with a line, starting with making a box or a square to contain something, and then moving on to icons and more kind of complex things. But the idea, again, is not so much you're going to create this beautiful picture, especially at the start. Maybe later when you've done it a lot more and you can kind of flesh those ideas out in a different kind of way. But when you're first starting out, the idea isn't to make a beautiful picture. The idea is to record and keep the information, communicate the things you're trying to communicate in the best way possible. And so the function of your sketch note or your drawing is much more important than whether or not it looks pretty when you're starting out. And I would even argue at the heart of what sketchnoting is.
Well, and so on that point, I may have a sketch note of something that is very clear and easy to understand that I can look at, and I hand it to you, and you have no idea what it even, you can't make, is it upside down, right? Am I looking at it from the back? You don't know what it even is trying to convey. And so I think that with that one size fits all that school is trying to, that does get people to do inevitably, because that's what they have you do. With sketchnoting, it's so personalized that I can make it something that is super relevant to me, because it's important to me that I understand those things. That is not something at all that you understand. And so that's where I think you're talking about, where making sure you know the audience. Is this something that only I am going to look at, only is going to be beneficial for me? Or do I have to create it in such a way that is helpful for everybody? It's going to go out to the staff. It's going to go out to the business, or whatever, whatever the audience is going to be. You have to keep that in mind as you're developing it, because you have the opportunity to put super specific things that are relevant to you only and don't mean anything to anybody else. And then you have to further explain those. So trying to keep your audience in mind as you're going about crafting that, like you said, is absolutely important.
One of the things that Ashton said that really helped me understand this concept, especially starting out, not knowing much about it, and kind of the progression you can kind of take, is she created it to a new language. When you're learning a new language, you're going to start with very basic words, and then maybe you learn phrases, and maybe you provide, or you learn sentences, and those sentences become much more and more and more, and eventually everything can kind of flow together. So we talk about this process starting very basic, using a line, and then continuing to develop your own language, or develop something that you can rely back onto, because sometimes taking your notes is going to be a rapid fire kind of thing. You're not going to have time to think about, oh, well, what should I draw for this? And you mentioned having like a key or a legend or something, whether it's written out or it's just in your head. You know that you have an icon that could stand for one thing or stand for many things, and you kind of develop that language to help you with your sketchnoting as you continue to progress. And I really like that, because looking at it in that way, I think, really helps to break down the kind of process you would take in order to start getting into sketchnoting, if that makes sense. And again, I don't know why that resonated so much with me, but kind of looking at it that way, it kind of provides a roadmap for how we can start to implement this, and the steps we can take to really make it part of our note taking and part of our communication as well.
Well, I think absolutely she's right. It's a new language that you're learning, and so starting slow and then building on is essential for learning how a new language works. You have to learn how the words work, how the individual letters work, and how that creates a word, and how the words create a sentence, how the sentence creates a paragraph, and so on. All of those build together. But on top of that, the idea of having one image that, and we talked about vision. Vision could be, a pair of glasses, a magnifying glass, a telescope, something like that. And so that reminds me of memory athletes. And memory athletes have what they call the mind palace. In the mind palace, they, it's like they walk through their childhood home, and as they have these 52 cards that they have to remember, they walk through their childhood home, and it's very vivid. They have real vivid imagery as they're building this palace in their head, and as they're walking through, okay, this card is placed here by the gigantic penny, and then this card is here, and they link those things together. And then as they have to recall that information, they just walk through their childhood home in their memory palace. Oh, this card is here, this card is, and that's how that system works for them. So the idea of an image, an icon that we talked about, an idea of an icon representing a idea, a concept, a paragraph, or whatever it is really kind of interesting, because that's similar to, I relate that to similarly to how memory athletes use their mind palace, where they have that image, and that image relates to whatever item it is that they have to remember. So you have an image that's a magnifying glass, and that magnifying glass means X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And as long as I know, anytime I see a magnifying glass in my notes, okay, yep, I know exactly what that is, because I relate that to that image, boom, and I can move on. And the cool thing about that is, maybe I'm thinking too far of this, but the cool thing about that is that means that I can take that one icon and allow that icon to take up a small section of space on the page. But that concept of that, whatever that icon is, the magnifying glass, is an overarching bigger area. Like it would take up a paragraph or half a page or something if it was all typed up or written. But because I can draw a magnifying glass and it's so small, that information can be relayed in such a smaller area, and none of the information is lost because it's linked to what I associate a magnifying glass at. Does this all make sense?
Yes, sir. You almost lost me at giant penny, but I understand where you're going.
Yeah, they're just real vivid kind of images in their mind as they're going through the mind palace. So that, and I hadn't linked those thoughts until now, as we're just talking, that you can use this as a sort of mind palace where you have the image, and that can correspond with whatever the information is. And, whether you have a key or not, as long as you know your reference point for drawing that magnifying glass, then that's what matters. That's what's important. So that's a really cool way to bring in another, again, I'm linking it to other information that I have. That's a cool way to bring in that other side of that and allow you to be more efficient as you're creating the notes, both in time, but also in space on the page, because that one icon can represent a multitude of different things. And as long as I know what I'm referencing, that's the key.
All
Yeah.
of this, yeah, all of this kind of ties into the last point that I have here, which is how we talked about a good communicator and a good communication has to do with storytelling. And so when you're making these notes and you're drawing these pictures and you're using icons to convey different things, it all kind of goes together to create this story. And when you're making those stories or making your notes, you want it to be easy, clear, and understandable. And that's the best way to communicate what you are thinking about, what you're talking about, what you're taking these notes about, is just making it simple. And so, again, having an icon that can mean many things helps to kind of make that more concise, and you can kind of branch out from there and work on this. And so, I just a very valuable way of taking notes and also communicating that I think is beneficial. And if we could get this into the hands of some people that can start to encourage this in schools or even at any point in time, I think it's a very a great system, a great thing to kind of engage in. And I think at the heart of it, and Ashton is very passionate about, or what Ashton is very passionate about, is helping us all to understand and believe that we are creative. And no matter what that level is, if you're just drawing a line or you're making extravagant pictures, we all are creative. And rather than squashing that and putting it away, we should nurture that and find out how we can use that creativity to better ourselves and better everyone around us too. And maybe, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think that's a huge part of what drives Ashton, is understanding that we're capable of all these great things, and we should be encouraging this in others and nurturing it in ourselves. And this is the way that she's found to do it, or one of the ways she's found to do it. And you can tell that she genuinely cares about what she's doing and the people that she's interacting with. So it was great to sit down with her and kind of go through this system.
Well, and storytelling is so important to how we convey a message to whoever it is you're talking about. If you think about the people who you like talking to, they're not telling you sort of say just the meat and potatoes of the story. They're telling you the whole if, ands, and whys and all the insides and outs, because then they paint that picture for you that you're building in your head. We talked about, oftentimes, more often than not even, I think we think in pictures, word pictures. That's a common way that we think about things. So if we're talking with somebody, the better we can tell that story, do that through storytelling, better we can convey that message by using storytelling will help to aid the understanding of whatever it is that you're saying, whether it's a funny story that you're telling about your kid, or if it's a essential part of the mission to your business. If you can tell it via storytelling, it will be perceived and understood and remembered because of that images, because of that story that you built. And you're right, the passion that Ashton has for sharing the creativity of sketchnoting and creativity in general is very clear as we're listening to her talk, and is definitely something I real baseline understanding of what sketchnoting is, but something I would be certainly up to trying more of, to try to foster that type of creativity, but then also I think understanding that that's how people think. And so if I can utilize the things that we talked about and put that into practice, then that'll help myself understand information better. But if I can share that with my team, with the listeners, with you, it'd be interesting to see, like, because you take notes for all the episodes.
Yeah, I did. I drew a little magnifying glass there
Okay.
as we were talking. I thought Ashton would be proud.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say. Is you take notes for all of for our guests, and so I wonder, would you be up for trying to incorporate some of those doodles as you're making the notes on the fly as we're talking to somebody?
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be willing to try it. I'd have to think of what I'm trying to convey, but it's a world we can definitely dive into.
Yeah, that'd be cool to adopt that moving forward, and then use that, because again, I think that there's so much value in this type of note taking, because writing lines on a page is not how we as humans associate the information back to itself and build the connections there. So, if we can try to incorporate that, that'd be awesome. Yeah, very
Yes, sir.
cool.
Yes, sir. Those are the points. Make sure you come back next time for another great conversation and even more points. Until next time, I'm Chris Kent.
And I'm Chris Bean.